Welcome to the Asia Climate Finance Podcast, where our host and expert guests delve into and scrutinize the pressing issues and emerging trends in climate business and climate finance. We greatly appreciate your support. Please like, review, and subscribe to the podcast to help us grow and reach a wider audience. Be sure to take note of the disclaimers at the conclusion of each show. And now, here is your host, investor, analyst, and author, Joseph Giacobelli.
Welcome to episode 54 of the Asia Climate Finance Podcast. First, a quick announcement. Thanks to our regular listeners, we've reached a significant milestone, over 10,000 downloads. As many of you know, this podcast aims to provide insights into climate business and finance trends, and reaching this milestone is really wonderful encouragement for our nonprofit initiative. So thank you. Now to today's episode. Our guest is Scott Hsu, Country Director for Taiwan and the Philippines at K2 Management, a leading Danish engineering and management consultancy. Scott brings extensive experience in the wind power sector, particularly in Taiwan's offshore wind industry. In our discussion, Scott first outlines the historical development of Taiwan's wind industry. We then explore several key topics like market participants, capital sourcing, offtake agreement challenges, and the ongoing local content debate. But first I start by asking Scott a little bit more about his background. Enjoy the episode.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. My name is Scott, and I'm the country director for K2 Management in Taiwan and the Philippine market. My personal academic background is aerospace engineering, and my full career, the last 26 years are all in energy sector. So the first 6 years of myself was in the gas turbine business. So that was in the massive installation of combined cycle power plant in Taiwan. So I was there for 6 years as a local subcontractor. And then I started joining GE at the year of 2004. End of my wind career as a commissioning engineer for the first big utility scale onshore wind farm project. And after GE, I was actually having my own personal boutique consultancies, just trying to offer my knowledge in GE turbines specifically. But somehow after working in a big companies, you being independent in Asia, that means nothing to the clients. So I started to travel overseas, mainly in Europe and North America, also heavily working in China, South Korea as a supply chain developer. So in certain exhibition occasion in France, I was actually had a meetup with one of the pioneer of offshore wind developer in Taiwan. So the owner of the company invited me to take the lead of the offshore wind project. That was the project lead as the Formosa one back in Taiwan. So that was also in 2014. So I was also the last 10 years in offshore wind business. So that's consists of my last 20 years in wind business. And last 7 years of myself was in K2 Management as the country director that we offer technical consultancies for both developers and lenders.
Right. So K2 is like is a consultancy for people who want to build farms. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we're supporting all the development and technical advisories to the projects who wanted to develop in globally.
That's because when you're developing a project, you need the legal side. So you need like a legal consultant or a law firm to help you. You need a financial entity to do the financial kind of numbers for you, and then you need a competent technical entity to help you with the technical side, right? So I guess we can get into the conversation about what is going on with, Taiwan and offshore wind in general. So could you just very, very briefly, I know it's not a very long history, but I know it's a complicated history, of the historical development of Taiwan's wind industry in general, onshore and offshore, and then, offshore in particular?
Yeah, for sure. I happen to be involved with the whole history of this wind development in Taiwan. Onshore wind development actually starts from the early 2000s. So that's beginning of the utility scale projects. And then the Energy Administration, formerly called BOE, that actually launched a demonstration projects from onshore wind sites that awarded to three smaller projects that started to define how the permitting frameworks needs to be, how the grid connection need to set up, and all this and that. So that actually have a pretty good successful subsidies that offers to three projects, and that was all well constructed and it's still operating now, even 24 years later. So that began of the whole onshore development. And however, that only initiate two major onshore wind developers. One is the state-owned utility, Taiwan Power Company. The other is a German private-owned developer called WPD, but it was formerly known as Infravest to begin with. And until 2012 and 13, that reached out to around 800 megawatts in total capacities. But if you consider 2 megawatt per turbine size, it's still a few hundred turbine already installed in the last 10, 12 years. But consider into a limit land and then densely populated island in Taiwan. So the Energy Administration started to consider or to explore the opportunity to put the wind farm in the ocean at the Taiwan Strait. With the successful demonstration subsidies coming from onshore that actually have the same similar schemes for offshore, that also awarded to three projects, one to the state-owned utility and two to the private-owned. Yeah, so that's actually the beginning, the successful story of this Formosa 1 project that completed in 2016-17, and that started to attract all the international developer investors coming to Taiwan. And since then, there were two rounds of auctions. So round 2 auctions awarded in 2018. For total 5,500 megawatts in size, and quite a few of them are already in operations, and then a few of them in the later stage will be completed in either 25 or 26. And also the recent round 3 auctions that was held in both 2023 and 2024, and each of the auction has around 2,500 and 2,600 megawatts for auction awarded to projects already. So I would say in the last 10 years of offshore wind journey in Taiwan, with more than 10 gigawatts is awarded to the projects, I think that would be a significant achievement for the administrations in Taiwan.
How much has been built so far in total? I mean, actual constructed and completed?
Roughly is more than 2,000 megawatt. It's already in operations, and there are just few of them left. But bear in mind, there is a gigawatt size project called Hairong is currently under construction. So that's supposed to be complete in 2 years of time.
So there was a lot of increasing excitement about the island's offshore wind industry for the last few years. But recently it seems that excitement has slowed down a little bit. Could you explain a little bit what happened?
Of course. So I think the excitement also comes from some kind of disappointment from the stakeholders themselves. As we just mentioned, these round 3 auctions consist with 3.1 and 3.2 auctions. And this round 3 auctions started to encourage developers to sell their production to the corporate off-takers. Which on the other side is the phase out of feed-in tariff from state-owned utilities. So I think that is one way that is the developer need to seek for corporate off-takers. And the other side is from the cost perspective, that also consists of the international inflations, rising interest, war, and that impacted logistic costs, things like that. And then we also have a growing numbers of market that is also promoting offshore wind development, even in the regions. So competition of the supply chain that also push up the whole increase of the cost put together of offshore wind. And then you can study to see we have a growing numbers of corporate off-takers looking at productions from offshore wind. And on the other side, the cost of offshore wind is going up. And then you actually just having that limits corporate off-takers that willing to pay more in electricity bills in renewable energy. That create a bit of challenges in forming a business case in offshore wind. That was the main driver of this, I would say, a bit slowdown of the speed of the development.
So a mismatch between the cost and what corporates are willing to pay, given that there was a phasing out of the feed-in tariff, right? So it seems that the interest is still there. It's just like a cost reward issue and challenge. But what about the source of capital? I mean, as we know, Taiwanese market is unable to source capital from like development banks such as the Asia Development Bank. How tough has it been for Taiwan's offshore wind projects to raise the capital?
That's actually a very good question. I think everybody also seeking all kind of different possibilities of financings locally. Before offshore wind, this is actually the first major private infrastructure projects that happened in Taiwan. Before these, those were the government-owned infrastructure projects. So non-recourse project financing was not really introduced to the market in the past. However, this offshore wind developments bringing into all these international lenders, export credit agencies, also seeking for collaborations from the local state banks and private banks. So the local banking industry is fully aware of there's no opportunity from all these international organizations like ADB or other direct lending organizations to Taiwan. But on the other side, for the banking liquidity size in Taiwan is actually still sufficient. I mean, the concern is not really without these international organizations' participation, is mainly because of if the state banks are willing to share the risk together with international lenders. So the amount of financing is not really an issue, but the willingness of the participation of the state bank is actually a major concern.
Got it. If we can move on to a couple of very specific questions about the offshore wind market today. How have international developers struggled to get a foothold in Taiwan's offshore wind industry, given the rising cost situation that you mentioned earlier, and given also these more stringent local content requirements, as well as the challenge in securing offtake? So just a follow-up to some of the points that you made.
Yeah, 10 years ago, I think all these offshore wind business was mainly happening in Europe, in the European Union regions. And
Right.
Taiwan was actually opened up the market in outside of Europe for these major European developers, for example, like Ørsted, formerly known as Dong Energies. We have Macquarie coming to Taiwan, and now that's Korea in offshore development. And we have CIPs, where have all the other European utility, for example, starting from EnBW, RWE, Iberdrola, all these major name EDF coming to Taiwan. And we also have the Japanese utilities and trading houses, for example, like JERA, like Marubeni. They all are trying to find a way into Taiwan. But however, Taiwan, I think East Asia is an unique market, considering each nearby country speaks different languages, using different legal frameworks. And the permitting frameworks are also different.
Right.
And you're writing different characters in official permitting basis. So it turns out it's not a copy-paste from European perspective development. And you need to find out a new solution, new approaches, together with a large amount of local teams to actually have the development into bilingual structure.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that is one way is the first challenges that you already have double the size of the teams. You need to expect it for the cost of the manpowers. And then I think localization requirements somehow, I would say from government perspective to introduce securing jobs locally and introducing new industry in the market. I think from government position, it's correct, but ramping up for the capacities as a normal European development speed, that is also another challenge. So you actually just tended to ignore the learning curve. And then ramp up speed to reach out to the certain quality of supply. So those are also another challenge to actually maintain the development speed from European experiences. So these are the major challenges that may have the international developers to expect a longer development processes and then having a different expectation on the cost itself. I think this is also the reason why all these major developers, when they were super excited to enter Taiwan in round two, a lot of them have a very speedy financial close and also completed the projects in time. But bringing them into round three with a similar setup, but with growing numbers of the cost in different packages, that will start to reduce the return of the investment. And then they will start to challenge if these markets or Taiwan it's the way the markets to continue develop for further projects. So we started to see there are some developers already left Taiwan for some other markets. So I believe that those are different developers. They have different expectations on the returns.
Right.
But we still see there are newcomers to Taiwan, either it's international or even local developers that would wanted to explore these opportunities from Taiwan offshore wind markets. Yeah.
Got it. Just a little bit of story I picked up, which is the complaint to the WTO. So what did the EU lodge a complaint with the WTO over local content rules, and what are the next steps for this particular dispute?
Sure. I think EU was requested a consultation back in July that it's specifically referring to Taiwan offshore wind rules that requires a localization requirement.
Right. So
that from the justification that the reason is EU consider this is discriminate the goods that is produced outside of Taiwan to participate the market here. So the government of Taiwan already sent the team to the WTO for the discussion of these, and you could start to see the government already release a bit of loosen the localization requirement in the future. For example, 3.3 auction, which may happen in the next year or so. But however, they don't trace back into 3.2 and 3.1, but only on the case-by-case discussion with localization requirement. I think in general, the localization requirement from government perspective, in the long run, these may be lifted. However, the timing might still be depending on the government decisions. But for the developers and also for the local supply chain, I think they need to start to expect in what could be a new approach that post localization requirements, and that because the competition is still the same with or without localization. Whoever who wanted to win over the auction, they'll definitely need to have a new approach to stay in the market as a leading position.
Talking about the final results from the round 3.2 offshore wind auction, what does it actually mean for the Taiwan offshore industry in general, and how will it develop going forward in your personal view?
So round 3 is actually the purpose is to have the developer choose their own preferred sites. So it's called a zonal development. However, the government also doesn't limit developer as a competition over the same area of the development. We could see Ørsted, their final sites of their portfolio in Taiwan has a competition with 2 other developers. So at the end, the auction rules actually have 2 stages of competition. The first stage is the price competitions, and however, each of the projects that submit the bids all submit with 0 price. So that automatically interprets that no one needs a subsidy from the government. And each one of the projects are seeking their production to the corporate PPAs. So, and then since everybody is equal with 0 in pricings, so all the comparison of the ranking of the auction needs to go to the localization rate. So whoever who submitted with a higher rate wins the auction. And then that ended up with the ranking number 1 is the local developers. They have highest localization rate. And then the second is the semi-locals that's having the team that developed Formosa ones that has now with international fundings, they win over Ørsted. And even since Ørsted is number 3, but their site was already occupied by the developer that wins as a number 2. So unfortunately, Ørsted were not able to be awarded with any sites in round 2. But you could still see those who are familiar with the local auction schemes, for example, like CIPs, like Coreos. These guys will be here almost 10 years. They interpret the auction rule well, and they will be awarded. And then the final one is a smaller private developers that was been also awarded. So you could see whoever who is familiar with the auction schemes, that you could still be an important role in Taiwan offshore wind market. On the other side, we started to see more local developers come into these markets. So it could be a very good milestones that we will start to see more local developers or local industrial investors. They are starting to feel more comfortable in investing offshore wind locally in the home market.
Right.
Yeah, and then will be very confident to compete with international developers in terms of their networks in authorities, their own connections with the supply chains, the also with the networks, with the local financing possibilities. So they started to see maybe it's time to compete with international developers in Taiwan.
Got it. If I can just a couple of follow-up questions, Scott. One is, what has been the price curve of the output? So I presume, the price of offshore wind production, the price at which offshore wind production was sold was very high 10 years ago, and then it's been coming down. But recently we've had the cost issue from high interest costs, from the supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So what has been the price curve? That's my first question. And the second one, which is probably a very silly question for an expert like yourself, is, if there's so many people that want to build offshore wind projects, and Taiwan has aims, net zero targets, et cetera, why don't you just let them build as much as can be built? If everybody has managed to get a corporate PPA, why not just let them do it? So these two questions: what about the price, and what about the potential growth of offshore wind?
Yeah. Okay. So about 10 years ago, the feed-in tariff is around $6 per kilowatt hour. Where most of the European developers, that they are very, very familiar with the existing technologies, that they consider this is a very good FITs, and that is offered by a state-owned utility, which is actually a sovereign level of credit for the PPAs. So that is mainly a very good commercial business case to Taiwan. But a few years later, when we started to have run two auctions, both Ørsted and Northern Power bid with their auction price around 2.5 Taiwan dollar per kilowatt hour. Yeah, and each one of them have their own rationale to bid lower. However, they are still able to build it and reach out to financial close. But since then, that you started to have COVID hit it to the world, and then we started to have all this inflation or everything that comes up in the last 2 or 3 years. And we started to see the cost of the projects actually comes back like double the original 10 years ago. Project. So now no one is able to actually bid with 2.5 Taiwan dollar per kilowatt hour. They need to be at least double the price to the market, which that it's much higher than the industrial electricity price in Taiwan. And Taiwan is considering one of the lowest electricity price for industrial consumers. Yes. So that is actually a bit of the gap in between the off-takers and the producers at round 3 right now. So a bit of this discussion is not only just localization, but when is this inflation and cost increase and rising interest could be settled in the next year or so.
Got it.
And I think the most important thing is if the state banks is willing to offer their lower interest financings to these projects, that could also lower the cost of the energies for each of the projects. So that was also one of the key factors for everybody to consider.
Right.
And I think for Taiwan overall in the last 10 years, I think that already built a very good examples for other markets that is willing to seek for developing offshore wind business. I think very, very important is I think the grid resilience is actually very important. That you need to actually having this capacity to allow massive offshore wind connections to the grid. Yeah. Consider each one of the project is most likely 500 plus megawatt, even this 1 gigawatt site. So that is already similar to the conventional power plant. So that's one thing very important. And second thing is a very transparent permitting processes that could give the developer with an expectation on when they could be full permitted for construction. And that could shape up the whole business case to the projects. And the third one is an infrastructure. For example, the port, the supply chains, all these has to be in a planning stage before the construction has been fully ready for that. So it's also a challenging journey in Taiwan to actually fight for a proper port of sufficient key sites for these massive heavy duty components for storage, for marshalling ports, for installation. So that would be a competition of projects during construction. So and then final one is a very good local financing scheme and collaborating with international lenders, because we still need to have quite a bit of involvement from each European export credit agencies or even Japanese and Koreans to promoting their own supply chain to work in different markets. So once the local lenders are willing to collaborate with ECAs to share the risk, I think those are also very important to build the whole successful market. And I think the final thing is, that's what I would also hope, since the permitting process of a regulatory framework in Taiwan is already existed. And we saw this auction, everybody bidding with zero and competing with localization. So the auction turns out doesn't have the function to justify which project is a better to be awarded. So it's better to actually just let each developer who has the willingness to develop offshore projects with the strength of financial capabilities and technical capacities to push for a faster development in offshore wind projects. And I think that could actually have all the other projects that could seek for sufficient development into Taiwan or into the regions. So I think the major lesson learned for the government is, if we wanted to have a target in a year to have net zero, we have timeline targets, but if we also need to have creating jobs locally of localizations, but we also wanted to have all the corporate off-takers to have sufficient renewable energy to off-take. You need to have a priority. Like if the timeline is the most important things, or if creating job is most important, but you cannot have everything you cannot have everything in at the same time. And that will jeopardize all your targets, and then nobody could follow. So I think these are the most important things, and then that will making all the investors coming back into the very pure business case development, who is actually having advantage for developing cheaper projects, who wins the projects. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to ask you one last question, if I could. It's about your personal outlook. I mean, if you had a crystal ball and you could, tell what the world is going to be like in the next 20 or 30 years, obviously you'd be a very rich man, but just kidding. But if you could actually tell what's going to happen in offshore wind in Taiwan in the next 20 or 30 years, understanding, like you mentioned, that you've got grid curtailment constraints, so the grid needs to improve, that you need new port facilities, etc. Where do you see, given you've been looking at this for a quarter of a century, where do you see the next quarter of a century going, if you were to guess?
I would not say it's a guess, but I would hope to see in 20 years of time, because Taiwan Strait is not a big sea area. So definitely that's a limited area which has wind resources. And most of the projects are developed with minimum 20 years of time, or even operating for 30, 35 years. So if the projects developed already occupy most of the windy sites, that we could see maybe 10 years later, we don't have new constructions in the water of Taiwan. And then we need to start seeing all these talents, all the supply chains, all the lenders, they are already having extensive experiences on developing offshore wind projects. Is that the timing for these specialists started to moving outside of Taiwan? For example, Philippines and Vietnam's, or even Australia, New Zealand, even Japan and Korea. Those could be a potential market. I think taking Denmark as an example, this is also a very similar size of the country with the similar size of sea areas. And you just need to have all these experience that is already collected in the market that started to use the most of them for international business. And then 20 years later, when we started to consider decommissioning of the existing projects, and that'll be the next wave of new technology in offshore wind. Maybe that's offshore something, maybe not wind, but that will be a next evolution of utilizing ocean energy in 30 years of time. Yeah.
Fantastic. Scott, thank you so much for answering all of the questions, for bringing some clarity on what's going on with offshore wind in Taiwan. And hopefully we can do this again sometime in the future and see how things are developing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very, very happy to have this conversation with you. That's fantastic.
Like they say in Chinese, 非常感谢.
谢谢你.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Asia Climate Finance Podcast. Please be advised that this podcast is presented for educational purposes only. None of the information provided should be construed in any way as investment advice. Always consult with a licensed investment professional before making any investment decisions. Additionally, please note that the views and opinions expressed by our guests are personal and may not reflect the views and opinions of their current or previous employers.